All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome. Thank you all for attending the 2023 Student Equity Advisory Board's final presentation. So just a quick history, back in 2020, we decided to start a Student Equity Advisory Board to provide a platform for students to be able to come and share issues and make changes in the state of Connecticut when it comes to equity in education. So we've been going strong now since 2020. Very excited to have some students in here who started off with the board and who will be graduating this year. Thank you for your tremendous work, everyone, for your tremendous work, hard work over the past few months. Since October, these students have been doing research on various topics that they chose over the summer, relevant topics that were passionate for them. So we're excited to present these topics to you today and offer recommendations for you to bring back to your districts. And without further ado, before we begin, I will turn it over to our Executive Director, Dr. Glenn Lungarini.
Thank you, Charisse. Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for the work that you've done, not only for those that have been here since the start of this and really kicked this off several years ago, but all of you who have worked this year to bring these meaningful projects to us in this culminating event. I think one of the most special things about this group is it's not just a group that gets together and shares with each other, but out of the work that you do becomes action items for our districts, for our schools. You truly are doing work that has a lasting impact within your schools, within your communities, and bringing awareness to equity and bringing change to equity. And we couldn't be more proud to have this group at CAS doing the work that you're doing today. We love following you as well as you graduate and you move on to see all the incredible things that you continue to do as some of the alum of this board and just seeing all that meaningful work that you bring to that. To really highlight that as well, you see some of the people who are watching today, both here in person and with us on Zoom as well. We're honored today to have Commissioner Russell Tucker come to us from the State Department of Education. If you're not over, so we're about 1 week left of the legislative session right now. So we know how busy Commissioner Russell Tucker is, and that's how important this was to her as well, to be able to spend some time with you as students and see the incredible work that you're doing. That's something that we know is a priority for the State Department of Ed as well. And some of our principals who are here today as well. Kristen, welcome, and our board members. It's great to have our parents and friends that are with us to see this incredible work as well. So congratulations on a great year. Thank you for all of your leadership, and we look forward to seeing the presentations that you have today. Thank you, Shirley.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lungarini. So again, just to echo Dr. Lungarini, Commissioner Charlene Russell Tucker has been a tremendous supporter. She's been at every Student Equity Advisory Board final presentation since we started. So we appreciate your time. We appreciate you always being committed to the group and supporting our students. So I will turn it over now to Melinda Liu. Melinda Liu was one of the first people to help us start this board, and she has done tremendous work, even drawing up objectives for next year's board. So we thank you, Melinda, for your commitment and all of the hard work that you put into this board. And we would like to welcome you to come up and welcome our commissioner.
So I have the honor this year of introducing Ms. Charlene Russell Tucker. So Ms. Charlene Russell Tucker was appointed by Governor Lamont as the Commissioner of Education for Connecticut at the State Department of Education in August 2021, and she previously served as many other positions in the department, such as the Deputy Commissioner as well as the Chief Operating Officer. And part of her initiative, she is a performance-driven and visionary education leader. She is very focused on giving students the opportunity to connect with families in order to improve things such as school attendance and also student participation within schools. She is also passionate about utilizing social, emotional, physical, and mental health as part of her initiative to help students create a better and more inclusive environment within their own schools. Ms. Russell Tucker has participated in a number of state and national committees, including the Connecticut General Assembly Committee for Children Strategic Action Protocols for Chronic Absenteeism, as well as other committees such as the Nutrition and Dietetics Committee. In 2015, she was nominated as one of the 100 Women of Color in Connecticut, and most recently, she was a nominee of the 100 Most Influential Black People within Connecticut by the Connecticut NAACP. So I have the honor of introducing Ms. Charlene Russell Tucker.
Thank you, and good morning. Thank you, Melinda, for your kind words. And Dr. Longarini, Sharice, and all of you there, I just thank you all for inviting me today, again, so that I can listen to your presentations and really just to express my appreciation for the work of the Student Equity Advisory Board. And you've heard my introduction, but I'm sorry I'm not able to be with you in person today, but I proudly serve as your Commissioner of Education here in Connecticut, and really pleased to be able to join this initiative every year to hear from you and to hear your voices. So to the students presenting today, congratulations, not only for having taken the initiative to serve on the Student Equity Advisory Board, but that you've dedicated the time to research important topics and put together the presentations we'll see today. I'm going to try to stay around as long as I can so I can hear those presentations today. I really also want to express my deep appreciation for the Connecticut Association of Schools under Dr. Longarini's leadership. Sharice, great guidance for all of you, for bringing us together just to highlight the board's work and your research and presentations. CAS has been an invaluable partner to the department in all our endeavors to provide extensive resources, guidance, and support to our districts in addressing effective practices and strategies to address student needs anytime, anywhere. And congratulations to those of you that will be graduating as well. I want to put in context for you as students that's in this room today, where you sit as students within Connecticut's overall public school education system. You hear us talk about that we want success for all, but who are those all? If I were in the room with you today, I was going to go around the room and see if we had any guesses, but Connecticut is a small but diverse state with over 500,000 students in our schools. So I want you to know, here's a number I want you to remember. It may shift a little bit, over the school year, but remember today, 513. Our student body in Connecticut, all of you included 513,513 students. I don't know if there are any eyebrows went up on that one, but that's the number that we're talking about in our public education system in Connecticut. And so keep that number in mind. Nearly 270,000 of that number that we talked about, so over 50%, if you're doing your math, identify as students of color. Nearly 270,000 across our state identify as students of color. Nearly 218,000 are eligible for free or reduced price meals. Over 88,000 are students with disabilities. Nearly 50,000 are English learners, speaking more than 145 languages. And across our student body, there's over 180 languages spoken. Cerise, maybe you can tell me if there are any eyebrows raising in the room with those numbers. But so when we talk about our educational landscape in Connecticut, we should be proud. We should all be proud to be part of such a rich and diverse ecosystem that is our education system. And so the diversity of our students, of all of you and families, can and should be leveraged as one of our greatest strengths when it comes to ensuring equitable access to the very best education in our state. That is why the work of this advisory board for you, amplifying student voice, is so very important. You're able to lift up the issues that you're encountering, sharing the varying perspectives and the complex issues that frankly will be encountered in the world around you and around all of us. So providing opportunities for students like you, for your voices to be heard, it also helps us as adults put into context the intricate cultural, social, developmental, and environmental backgrounds our students and also our staff bring into our school communities. So boards such as this, which incorporate your voice, remain so very important. And the goal of this board, I know, is to celebrate diversity by creating a welcoming and engaging environment for every student in Connecticut. We recognize we cannot make policies about you without you. And so your work and the presentations you're making today, really important as you go back, bring these action items back to your schools. You are today leading the charge. You are demonstrating your ability to be change makers by addressing these very important topics. And some of those that you're talking about, as you've heard from my bio, have always been connected to making sure we address the social, emotional, mental health of our students and families as well. And we always want to make sure we're recruiting and retaining educators of color in our school systems. So know that your Department of Education is here to support you. And together we'll continue to advance our shared goals for building schools and communities that are equitable places for you to learn and for you to grow. Cherise, thank you all very much for being here, and I'll turn it back to you. And I'll listen to your presentations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Russell Tucker. We always appreciate when you come on with your statistics and all of the, things going on in the state of Connecticut. And again, congratulations to our Student Equity Advisory Board for being here at the final presentation. And without further ado, I am going to get the presentation started and we will call our first group up.
Hi, everybody. So our group, we're looking in solving inequities across Connecticut high schools by investigating chronic absenteeism. So first, we're going to talk about how inequities are shown across Connecticut, especially with regards to schools and area. So income inequalities have resulted in a lot of inequalities with regards to student achievement. And we can see this in that Connecticut has one of the largest achievement gaps between rich and poor students. And the fact that the education system is funded a lot by taxes, which means that areas with low income only get so much funding through the people that live in that area. And that contributes to furthering these inequities in money and resources, which is then seen by the gaps in student achievement in those areas. So as you can see, there are these lack of resources, which contributes to what students are able to achieve because of what they have to support them. So 78% of teachers from Alliance districts report inadequate classroom ventilation, and that's a lot. And that's due to the funding and what they have to spend to improve the quality of their facilities. And because of these lack of resources that are already seen in mandated academics, there's an even larger gap when it comes to extracurricular activities and the options for students on what to participate in, and also how far they can go, whether that is in sports or academic clubs or any other type of extracurriculars. In fact, Connecticut's 5 wealthiest towns hold 159 championships, and the 10 poorest towns only have 44 in comparison. And this is just another example of that large achievement gap. So when we were looking into this issue, we started with an interview with Dr. Longarini. And from this interview, we found that something that we thought of was that when academic resources become more balanced, that could also lead to extracurricular resources and achievements becoming more balanced and equitable. And one thing that has really been affecting more of those lack of resource schools compared to schools that have a lot more resources is chronic absenteeism. And the idea is that when there's more engaged community and more engaged students, that can lead to more funding and getting more people involved with what is happening in the school, which leads to our bottom line that
Doesn't want to move.
improving attendance and lowering chronic absenteeism could bring more equity into schools.
So our next section, as Anushka talked about, then we turn to reframing our issue on more focusing on school attendance, specifically chronic absenteeism. So we're just going to look at some of the trends and some of the research that we did. So chronic absenteeism basically means a student is missing at least 10% or more of their whole school year. So if your school is 180 days, it would be 18 days in the school district or in the school year. And then, so we also looked at like reasons and also different reports on why students are chronically absent and what is the effect of this. So some of the reasons for attendance includes like barriers such as familial obligations, and especially due to COVID, it's the disease factor. And also there's other factors such as aversion and disengagement. So students aren't engaged in school, or if they're just simply not interested in what they're learning, they're less likely to come to school and more likely to be chronically absent. So what are the effects of this? It's that there's major achievement deficits, as Anushka talked about before, and there's a lack of social development as well as increased dropout rates in the future. And there's also lower rates of success in higher education. So if we want to make schools more equitable for students in the long run, we want to make sure that students are actually going to school and they're also being engaged within their school environment so that they're also able to succeed in higher institutions. So some of the data we gathered was basically we did a data analysis on the State Department's data for chronic absenteeism. So if you look at the left graph, it's basically the attendance rate between the three poorest and richest towns in Connecticut. And we saw that there was a big difference in, if we compare the per capita income of these three towns in the attendance rate. So typically, the three lowest towns had around like a 90 to 85% absence rate, while the towns with higher income, they had higher attendance rates at around 95%. And then if we look at location, it was a little varied. So in urban areas, there tended to be lower rates of absent or lower rates of attendance because obviously students have more opportunity to go to workplaces. So that could hinder the attendance rate in comparison to the suburban and rural areas. So we also looked at other reports that kind of looked at the COVID effects, because after COVID, a lot of districts, especially New Haven, have been hit hard with this attendance problem. And you can see in the blue graph and the red graphs, it kind of compares the chronic absenteeism rate in the 2019 to 2020 year, which is the blue, and the 2020 to 2021. So it kind of shows the effect of technology and COVID on this whole situation and why this is so important, because it is on the rise. So now Mackenzie's going to explain some of our policy recommendations for this issue.
Okay, so one of our policy recommendations was implementing the LEAP program, which stands for Learner Engagement and Attendance Program. And currently this is across 15 different school districts in Connecticut, but we're trying to make that more. So basically what this program is where you have a home visitor that comes and connects with different families that are in the school system to try to help make it so they feel okay and that they're comfortable and have everything that they need to make it so they can be in school as much as possible. So 9 months after the initial LEAP visit, attendance rates had increased from 15 to 20%, which is a great amount. So what this program does is to ensure the attendance is a higher rate. And basically for districts, if the chronic absenteeism rate is over 10%, there needs to be a LEAP program that is created. And in certain schools, it has to be 15% chronic absenteeism rate or higher. The school attendance committees should report to the local boards of education, so everyone's on the same page and is aware of what's going on. And by implementing the LEAP program, again, it's going to increase the attendance rates and make it so more kids have the ability to be in school and getting to participate in activities and extracurriculars.
So thank you so much for listening to our presentation.
Does anyone have any questions? I know some people from this group will have to head out early, so they'd love to answer any questions you might have.
Yeah.
Yes.
Did you come across when you were researching, you kind of led with the inequitable funding
Yeah.
across towns. Did you come across any, excuse me, states, countries, places where funding is more equitable and you see a positive impact on the attendance rate?
So we didn't look specifically at like other countries, but we saw some other trends where some countries it's more the government funds the education system. So obviously it's more equitable if the government does it because they have a bigger pool of money. And especially within Connecticut, the issue really is that towns or suburban towns, especially where the system works way better because they have more taxable property, they really don't want to get away from the system because it works for them. But then for more urban districts, they don't really have as many, like, as much land to kind of collect property tax. So they are kind of suffering from that. So it's kind of this balance between what is best for both towns in like the urban, rural, and also suburban.
All right, Commissioner Russell Tucker.
Thank you, Sharice, and excellent presentation. Thank you very much. And I love that you got a lot of your stats and information from the Department of Education. We try to make sure information is publicly available. I wanted to find out though, did you have any chance, just thinking about the issue of attendance in general, to talk to students like yourselves or just to hear from their perspective? What some barriers may be and how that could be in the mix in your recommendations as well. So what are students like yourself saying about this particular issue? And is there anything that we can learn from that, whether that was a part of your research?
So one of the main aspects of our research was we were reading the report about the LEAP program that Mackenzie talked about earlier. And one of the main highlights of that report is that since it was basically like a test study, for this program, one of the main highlights was that they included a lot of testimonies from specifically administrators, students, as well as teachers who were the home visitors. And one of the things we found really powerful is that a lot of students, and especially parents within the report and their testimonies, they talked about how they didn't feel connected to the school, especially after COVID, since everything was virtual. They didn't feel the need to go to school because they felt a less connection to the community members. So one of the main highlights of the LEAP program, as Mackenzie talked about earlier, was that the fact that there's a home visitor who actually works at the school or is connected with the school. So if this home visitor is more connected with the student is more likely to go to school because they know that there's someone in the school who looks out for them, who looks out for their well-being and understands the situation they're going through.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Okay. All right, thank you. Okay. Our next group. And while they are getting set up, I am going to hand, we have the agenda and also the a feedback form on here. And I'll also make sure I include that for our virtual viewers as well.
Good morning, everyone. I am Alvin. This is Kruti and this is me. And we will be talking about mental health and social and emotional learning in schools.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you all are doing well. So the first thing that we want to start off with is a question to you guys, so feel free to answer. What are some of the skills, whether you work at a job or you're in school, what are some of the skills that you use every day? Yeah, go ahead. You
Like talking to people.
talking to people? Liana,
I was gonna say communication.
communication. Don't be shy. Problem solving skills, yep. One more, maybe two adults.
Active listening.
Active listening.
Just trying to understand where I'm coming from and where other people are coming from.
Different perspectives, understanding different perspectives. I saw your hand.
Relationship building.
Relationship building. So when you understand all your answers, no one said, oh, I use my skills that I learned in my data science class in college, or I use the statistics class every day. Not saying that they don't come into play, but it's not that you're using it every single day in every single interaction. What you're using every day are relationship skills, your social awareness, how you're able to connect with others, how you're able to function and make responsible decisions, how you're able to control your emotions, right? And you see that students are using it, but you see adults who have been in their professions for X amount of years are also using this. But the problem that we're seeing right now is that students in our school system are not getting these skills. Right? That's our current problem. We have students who are lagging in these skills. We're trying to push academics and education, which is important. But if we're not adequately preparing them for the responsible decisions they need to make, the problems they're going to need to solve, we are not getting them ready for going into the workforce or going into their future career or trade or whatever they may be doing, right? High school and elementary school and our school system is supposed to be preparing us for what comes next. But right now we are at a plateau. And a lot of people say COVID caused this, but the reason being is like when you reflect, we're all still in crisis management. We're still trying to combat all the issues that were caused by COVID, but not trying to restore, right? We're not trying to create new solutions. How do we get students who went into COVID as 8th graders and now are in high school to get caught up with those skills? Because that's what's going to be needed after they get out. Right? Like we can't just continue to crisis solve and put students in tier 3 supports or tier 2 supports without understanding that our tier 1 supports are not even as strong as they should be. In a lot of schools, we don't have all of the students having resources to understand their emotions, make those responsible decisions. They don't have someone who's teaching them this or helping them learn this, right? We don't have the programming, like the personal development. And that's why we're facing so many students having struggles in academic classes because they aren't able to build relationships with teachers, right? They aren't able to build that connection, or they're having the problems because they're sitting in class and they don't have those critical thinking skills or responsible decision making. So what we want to express as a group is how do we get our students to a place where they can take these skills that they need for the future and start learning them throughout high school and middle school. So we did a survey and we got some testimonials from students, and you guys can read, we got quite a few, but these are just 3 we want to spotlight. One of the students said, I hate school. I love learning, but the environment makes me sick. Another student said, the school should try to be more understanding and not only believe what they want to believe. And a third student said, it doesn't seem like there are a lot of readily available resources when we are struggling. The occasional attempts from teachers to talk about social situations don't really have any impact. So just think about what these students are saying from across Connecticut in an anonymous survey. In the context, which I'm sure you guys can read and understand from what I said, social emotional learning and mental health are the foundation of academic and athletic success. We need to understand the importance of SEL and mental health in order to adequately support our students.
For our table of contents today, we are going to share with you data from the state regarding mental health and mental health resources, the survey data we have collected from over 250 students, and then issues with our current implementation of mental health initiatives, and finally, solutions that we propose.
So state data, you guys can look at this yourselves, and I'm sure you can read the questions in the bars. But I want to point out like 3 main things that you can notice. This is from the State Department of Education on their website. And for the question of SEL is a district expectation for promoting a positive school climate, we had majority of the schools who responded to the survey say that is a initiative they support, that they agree with it. SEL is a expectation that they want to implement, especially now that it's become such a buzzword and important. They are saying they agree with this initiative. But when you look at SEL as part of the district's mission, you only see about 50% of districts saying yes, right? So that makes you think. We have almost all the schools saying, yes, SEL is important. We acknowledge it, but only 50% of them incorporate it into their mission. So that makes you think, like, are they just saying that to check the box and fit into that norm of, yes, we support SEL, or are they actually creating initiatives to help their students and provide them with those resources? And then the scary and sad part of this data is when you look at district has developed or adopted SEL standards. So we have standards that schools set where students need to work on relationship building. They have advisories or they have different programs which implement these SEL skills. We have less than 50% of schools saying yes, right? Like we see that schools understand the importance, maybe they're trying to implement it, but we don't have resources to implement this in schools, or we don't have clear direction on how to implement this. And that's why we don't have many schools implementing these necessary programming initiatives where we do need to focus on the personal development aspect, where we do need to focus on the mental health and social emotional learning aspect to help our students have academic and athletic success. So the survey we conducted was sent out to students in Connecticut at different high schools. And the questions that we posed, these are just 3 of the overarching ones, were like mental health factors, how many various factors such as family, work, etc., impact the student, school mental health initiatives, such as how helpful are various school resources, and mental health state initiatives. Are you well versed or have you been informed of the state initiatives that are there regarding mental health wellness? And the responses, they were again anonymous from Connecticut schools, students specifically, and we received more than 250 responses. In the survey data, I'm going to go over this briefly. The mental health factors that students said that impacted them the most and created the most long-term impact on how they behave was homework and course rigor and school culture / environment, right? We had a majority of the students say that the school culture and environment impacted how their classes were, how they felt coming in, how their everyday activities, whether academic or athletic, went, because the school culture and environment was embodied in all of their classes as well as in their sports teams. The supports in school, on a scale of 1 to 10, majority of the supports got an average score of 5, right? We had advisory up there, we had student support centers, counselors, and most students said 5 as they don't really use the resource or they haven't really been exposed to that resource. So we have these supports in place that aren't being used. So we need to really think about how do we take these supports and make them effective. And then we had mental health initiatives. So advisory, counselors, occasional assemblies were the 3 responses that got the most votes for what occurs in schools. And a lot of the advisory lessons, we had comments such as they're not relevant anymore, they're old, they're not something that pertains to us. And then for state initiatives, we mentioned 2 mental health days and that there are SEL initiatives and projects that schools should be doing. And a lot of students didn't know that. They didn't know that they have 2 mental health days that they can take a year. So that was our data. And now we'll be talking about the issues that we found.
So everyone here, make no mistake, our students are still continuing to suffer from trauma, from loss, from financial insecurity, and the self-doubt that the pandemic has caused, which means that emotional learning and mental health is more important today than ever. So now the question is, where are we falling short? And we identified 3 areas of issues that we see with the current implementation of mental health. First is the lack of state funding and funding in general for mental health initiatives. During the pandemic, we've seen that the majority of schools have funded mental health entirely with their own budget, meaning that a lot of initiatives have been less effective than we want them to be. Thus, we need more staffing and more expertise in order to have more effective programming, which means that we need more funding from the state. The second issue we have identified is a lack of education around mental health. And by this, we mean that mental health and SEL learning is still not emphasized enough in school environments. We think that mental health should be made a core part of curriculums of health and also psychology, but not only that, but also in general classes where individual teachers should equip students with the skills of goal setting, of organization, and overall the ability to communicate with others. And thirdly, we see that there's a lack of support for teachers in giving these forms of education. We think that it is important to give our students the mental health supports that they need, but in order to do so, our staff and our administrators and our teachers also need to be educated and have the mental health resources to support their learning. So our solutions are in two levels. We have school-wide solutions and also statewide solutions. For schools, we have identified 4 solutions that we can implement. First is making mental health resources more accessible through having it be promoted through school bulletin boards or school handbooks, and also having a school-wide assembly at the beginning of every year, explaining the resources that are available to every student. Second is having schools have student and teacher feedback through annual surveys and forums. Third is improving curriculum on mental health and updating curriculum with new research, with the staffing that is for mental health in the school being a part of this form of education, and also having a multifaceted approach to mental health, engaging students, parents, administrators, and teachers in this goal. So the second level of solutions we present is on the statewide level, and we have advocating for more mental health funding from the state through like advocating for legislation. And also the second and probably the most important solution we're going to offer today is having a statewide committee on mental health, involving principals and educators from every school district and having annual meetings where they present the things that have worked for their schools. And while this form of committee does not currently exist in Connecticut, it has been implemented in many other states. For example, Florida has an SEL district collaborative effort, engaging districts in implementing and also discussing the statewide capacity in order to implement mental health initiatives. And as studies and also the Florida implementation has shown, there has been an 11% increase in student education when there is in student academic achievement when there is SEL intervention. There's more economic development and also a significant reduction in mental health problems, conduct problems, emotional distress, and also drug use.
So we created a step-by-step action plan. And one of the first steps we came up with was create a committee of parents, students, and staff in the district. We think that this will help the committee discuss how SEL is working in their district and talk about further steps they could take with SEL.
And like Ming said, this is a way to start the state committee. Obviously, a state committee is necessary, but in order to have adequate presentations and collaborate with other districts, we need each district to have their own mental health committee where they're focusing on this, considering how important it is to our students' success in the long term and short term. The second step is analyzing data and focusing on 2 to 3 areas of improvement. A lot of times when we hear SEL and mental health, it's such a big category that we stray away from figuring out what to do. And obviously, we're not going to be perfect on the first try. That's sometimes what we strive for, and that's not attainable, right? Like maybe pick 2 or 3 areas that you're going to focus on every single year and try and improve on just those 2 or 3 areas. Maybe you're going to focus on making relevant advisory lessons, right? And focus on that throughout the year and analyzing the data. The thing is, a lot of times we get surveys at schools, but we don't really see outcomes from those surveys. We don't really see what happens. So taking that data, taking feedback from students into consideration and really focusing on the improvements that you can make. Because if we're emphasizing student voice through this platform and in schools, we should be taking the student perspectives into consideration as well.
For step 3, after analyzing 2 to 3 areas of improvement, we want schools to consult with other schools in the district or in the state in order to find the best solutions to those problems. And finally, the schools would have to then implement these solutions that they have identified effectively.
Thank you. Anybody?
If I were to open a magnet or charter school, would the 3 of you come and work? And just take on the role of director of the core curriculum, which would be SEL?
Hey, I would love to do that. We should open it up where, you know, one in New Hampshire,
There you go.
California, and then one in Connecticut for Alvin. We should open up 3.
We'll go national right out of the gate.
Right.
Sounds good. Who's got it? Come on.
If there are no questions, we appreciate it. Thank you so much. Oh, Isaiah,
So,
always count on you.
you mentioned something about mental health days.
Mhm.
So with all of us, like all the students, all of us, right, that transition back into. Do you think like the 2 or 3 mental health days would have helped us have an easier transition into?
I think that's a great question, right? And I think when you unfold this question, it really goes into understanding what the purpose of those 2 mental health days should be, right? Like we have this state initiative of every student gets 2 mental health days a year. But within that initiative, there's also the idea of how are we making school a place where we're also implementing initiatives where our students can come to school, even if they're struggling, and have resources to feel better, right? Those mental health days are supposed to be there if you need them, which is totally okay, but that's not the only solution. If that were the case, we would need like 10 of them. Because the school year can be stressful for many reasons, whether it's in-school factors or out-of-school factors. But what we forget is that there should be in-school programming, in-school methods where we are focusing on the personal development, the responsible decision-making, giving students the resources of an adult who they can come to school, like Melinda said, like someone who they can trust and feel like, okay, this person knows my situation, they're gonna be able to support me. So the mental health days are just something that the state is providing, but at the end of the day, the core of this is being able to have school be a space where students are learning and growing as individuals, not just academically.
Do you think there's anything that schools could do to kind of help support those mental health days? Because I know that sometimes whenever I have to miss a day of school or I'm feeling very stressed and I'm considering staying home, but then that kind of stresses me out even more because I know when I come back to school, I'm just going to be more stressed about all the work that I missed and have to make up on top of everything else. But I know like you can't just get exempt out of work, but do you see any type of solutions or support that schools can bring to make sure that like your mental health days aren't just prolonging your stress?
Yeah, so I think there's 2 things we can do. So first, for the students themselves, I think we should have the schools teach the students about what it means to use one of those mental health days and what they should be doing with them to use it effectively. And also some students are just out of school because they need to be somewhere because say like a family member has passed or there's an emergency in the home and they have to miss school, but they are not getting like an excused absence or such a thing. Or like they need an extension to process these events. So in that case, then the students should have this education about like what the mental health days are for and what they can use it for. But also the second answer is for the teachers themselves, right? Schools should publicize mental health days as something that the school should support. And therefore each teacher should give students the ability to say, catch up on work or support the students in planning if they had missed any work, and the teachers themselves should be understanding of when the students use mental health days. And both of these solutions would have to come from more education, more awareness of mental health days in schools, which we currently do not see.
And can I just add one thing, right? Like going off of the point being made about teachers, like we see our teachers have burnout too, right? Like they're educators, they go through a whole year and at the end of the year, like a lot of them are burnt out and they probably need mental health days as well. Because like teaching high schoolers, middle schoolers, elementary schoolers, it doesn't get easier at any level. So I think being able to support our teachers is also an important factor in them being able to support us adequately. Because a lot of times when you go into a class and like you sense the teacher's energy, it impacts how we feel walking in. Like if we are stressed or if we feel like, okay, I can go up to my teacher and ask them for a little extension, right? So it all starts off with how are we also supporting our teachers on this whole journey? Because it's a toll for both students and teachers alike. And I promise you, a lot of teachers are also figuring it out right alongside of us.
I think that is, I have a question, before I ask the question, I think that, that's another place where you would see so many inequities, is how the use of personal days at the teacher level, how that is, governed, mandated, how the language is written in teacher contracts, and then how, administrators see that through.
Right.
I think you find a lot of inequities there. My question is there any potential or was there any time when you were preparing this year where SEL and attendance came together around some kind of, you know, we talk about preparing kids for the workforce. Could attendance be treated a little more like that, where students get, you know, X number of days, they build up sick days, they have personal days, maybe we don't call them mental health days. Was there any conversation around just some out of the box thinking from the state? I mean, you're already doing a lot of out of the box thinking.
I think that's a great idea, right? Like that's a great solution. I'm just thinking about it in my head right now, like how that would work.
Yeah.
I think, see, that's where we all need to go back to the board, right? Like we had COVID happen and then we went into like teachers, parents, schools, the corporations, like corporate America, we all went into crisis management. Everyone was like, what are we gonna do? We're all at home. The world is kind of on the brink of falling apart. Like we don't know what's gonna happen. And we were all just crisis. And Amanda Pickett actually from the State Department said this the other day, and it was such a good statement. Like we were in crisis management when we also should have had one team focusing on like, how are we gonna come back and like move forward? And I think that's where we all need to go back, because I think schools are still in crisis management. We're 3 years ahead, but like we have kids coming in who are, I see this in school every day. It's like, we don't know how to adequately even write an essay, right? Like those simple skills of writing an essay that we think should be normal, kids didn't get. And that's because they were at home. They didn't have the ability to really focus. They didn't have those responsible decision-making skills. They didn't mature through. Right now, we have kids who frankly don't know how to talk to a teacher. And that's disappointing, like cursing out teachers, behaving in inappropriate ways that you should not be behaving in school. So we need to figure out how we're gonna get all students on the same page. Because personally at my school, I can see a lot of like, everyone gets thrown into tier 3 or tier 2 supports. Like, oh, they're tier 2, oh, they're tier 3. When it's like, we have so many kids that triangle that should be like this is inverted.
Absolutely.
Right? Like tier 1 is so small and tier 3 and tier 2 are huge. So how do we make sure that we have supports all the way through? And that's called rethinking, right? And a lot of times we're scared to go back to the drawing board because we're scared to say we don't have it all figured out. Thanks. I'm sorry, you've heard me talk for way too long. I know you guys are sick of me.
We look forward to hear.
Any other questions?
Yes.
Oh,
I was waiting. I was
here we
waiting
go.
for
I
this one.
was waiting for this one.
So my question is, and it's just opinion, with this being such a big issue that we know it's across the board throughout the state, throughout the country, what's your thoughts on why don't you think the districts or whoever's in charge, why don't you think they're putting more emphasis on and following through on the social emotional learning?
You want to take this one, guys, or do we all, we should all give our perspective.
3 different districts.
3 different districts, 3 different perspectives.
So the question was why the districts are not putting enough emphasis? So I think that, again, going back to what Kruti said, a lot of districts are still trying to figure out how education with technology and after COVID has worked. So a lot of schools do not have the capacity to also implement widespread mental health initiatives. But to be honest, for Amity, I think that there has been a lot of work done for mental health initiatives. There has been more social workers being brought in, more psychiatrists being employed. But a big part of it also is like inequity, right? Because Amity is from a very wealthy district in Woodbridge and Bethany and like Orange. And so we have the capacity to implement all of these things. But then for a less privileged neighborhood where there aren't as many property taxes, right? We don't have the resources that students need in order to implement well thought out and like widespread initiatives for mental health. And I think that's why a lot of districts have been struggling with making that a priority, even though we know it is different. We know it is very important and we know it is vital for student success.
I think everyone can implement CARE. I think everyone can implement caring. That doesn't take much. If you understand the situation that we're in right now, as Kruti touched on, where kids across the state can't read, write, create an email, write a paragraph, put a period down, have effective communication with people running around the school like it's a playground. Like everyone can implement CARE. So I'll stop there.
I think for my district, I think we try to implement SEL, but it just hasn't been effective. And I think, like Ming said, we have a lack of resources. So I think it's harder to do something that's effective in our district.
I think I'm gonna provide coming from Windsor, we have SEL initiatives. We do. We've had State Department come there. We've had them seeing what we do, what we conduct. But sometimes I think we brush under the rug at Windsor that, and like not just Windsor, this could be a lot of other schools as well. That at a lot of places, we're just trying to check off boxes. And it's like they are, and the question was like, oh, why aren't we implementing SEL initiatives? I don't even think sometimes that our districts know what to do, right? Like implementing CARE is simple, but again, you need to have a clear idea of how you're going to do this. You need to have the right people in the right places doing this. Sometimes I go into certain spaces and I see certain people in positions and I'm just like, you don't know what you're doing. You can't help me with this. Like I can't come to you and get adequate advice on what I need advice for. So I'm just trying to figure this out on my own, right? And I think, I was fortunate to have him at Windsor, and that gave me a lot of guidance and support, but it's like not every student has that, right? And a lot of times we're just at schools, because schools at the end of the day are also trying to put up an image of like what they do, what they have. And a lot of times we just put up a picture perfect image of what we're doing. But a lot of students underneath that image are struggling. They don't have resources. They don't know what's going on. Like I'm standing here and people would think, oh my God, this, like, she knows what she's doing. Windsor must be doing great. But like, I'm one kid and I've had those resources and there's so many others. If you go to Windsor, if you go to other schools, if you go anywhere who are barely hanging on. And when they walk out, like when they walk across that stage, they don't have these skills. They don't, because we've just put up this image of what we're doing, but we haven't really effectively thought about making an impact on the students and providing powerful programs. Feedback? Oh, that's mine. Thought I was gonna hear something.
Okay, well, thanks so much. For those of you who are joining us on Zoom, if you wouldn't mind just putting your name, role, and district in the chat so we can follow up with you later. All right. Our next group can come up. I am going to find the lighting over here.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dwight. This is Akash, Kayla, and Jamar. So what we'll be talking about today is minority representation in education and like the different steps we could take to just make school a more inclusive environment between the teachers, students, administrators, everyone. All right, so our presentation is broken down into 4 different parts. So first, we're going to start with the content, which will be given to you by Akash and Jamar. This will just discuss background information, why it's an issue, why it's important, things like that. Then I will go into the data and research and things we found in our survey. Afterwards, Kayla will talk about the interviews she did with she interviewed someone in her school that like works in this kind of field that gave some good insights on our topic. And then lastly, Akash and Jamar will finish us off with the solutions and just different recommendations we have as a group.
Okay, so the first thing I'm going to talk about is why this is important and why Connecticut schools need to focus on this. And so the first thing is we need students to have someone in their school that they can look up to and someone they can relate to, someone who looks like them and has experienced this and has had the same experiences as them, no matter what their skin color is, no matter where they're from, no matter what financial background they have, they need to have someone that they can connect to in their school. And so that's important, and we want to promote inclusivity because apart from making students feel more comfortable, it'll also reduce the amount of attacks on minorities, whether that's physical or whether that's just verbal. And so what we want to do is give minorities a role model and promote more social behavior by promoting students and minorities to go seek out these role models, whether that's in sports, whether that's through coaches, or whether that's connecting more with their teachers. And so how we want to talk about how big of an issue it is. So the first thing we want to understand is what low performance schools are. And so low performance schools are the bottom 10% of schools in Connecticut that do well on academic papers. And so low performance schools have disproportionately high turnover rates, which means that teachers that struggle to show an upward trend, they lose their jobs. And in recent years, there's been an influx of teachers leaving the profession or moving to better funded school districts, forcing inexperienced teachers to fill vacant spots. And this high turnover lets students, especially of minorities, not get connections with their teachers, which is a big issue when they lose interest in school, leading to lower scores, and it just becomes a vicious cycle.
So just some data about Connecticut specifically. In Connecticut, only 11.2% of all staff in Connecticut, which includes teachers, administrators, counselors, social workers, pretty much anyone who works in a school, identifies any race that isn't white. But about 53% of all students in Connecticut actually identify as people of color. Additionally, there's a disparity as well between minority students in advanced classes. Black students make up 15% of all high schools nationwide, but only 9% of students who are actually enrolled in at least one AP class. And then Latinx students make up almost a quarter of all high school students nationwide, but only about 21% of students enrolled in at least one AP class. So there's a clear disparity regarding Black and Latinx students, Latinx students, and advanced classes as well.
So before I get into the data and research, we have a quote here from Jacqueline Woodson. And it reads, "The diversity is about all of us and about us having to figure out how to walk through this world together." Okay, so before I get into the data, I want to talk about a policy that's already in place that's supposed to help with minority representation. So this is the Public Act 18-34. And basically what this is, it's a policy that we put in place as a state to for schools to develop a plan, like a hiring plan for when it's time to like look for teachers to have in the school district in the building. Like, so they had to implement a plan, they had to implement a plan about like what kind of people they're targeting to make sure each student has like someone in the minority that they can relate to. So when they go to hire, they're supposed to follow the plan, and then this is to try to close the gap between the high minority student rate and then the low minority teacher rate. Okay. Next slide. So we sent out a survey to different school districts about how students feel about minority representation in their specific school and their school district. And if they had any recommendations and then they could talk about any experiences they've had with low minority representation. So the survey had different short answer questions and then questions from on a scale of 1 to 5. Next slide. A few of the survey questions that I want to highlight was like, what is representation to you? Do you have any classes where you learn about relatable topics? And do you have teachers that look like you that you are able to go to if you have a problem? I'm gonna come over here for that one, the data. So first, we look up here. This is a question about if you feel discouraged in academic spaces where you're underrepresented. So for this one, it was actually pretty balanced across each category. So green is agree, red was disagree, and yellow was just neutral. So it was about like 33% for each one. So everyone, so people felt like, some people felt like they have class, they don't, some people agree with this, that they feel discouraged, some people didn't, and so we're just in the middle. Well, as we go to the other questions, they're much more skewed into agree or disagree. So this one's, I don't have teachers I can go to that like look like me. And for this, like about 66% of people said they don't have teachers in their building that they can go to, even after we have the that public act that is supposed to help us to hire more teachers for people to relate to. But this much students still feel like they don't have much to relate to. And then compared to disagree and then agree with, I mean, neutral were just like 40%, 30%. And this one was, I don't learn about topics I can relate to. And this is even more just because the agree side that a lot of students aren't learning about topics they could relate to. It's more like 80%. I know for my school personally, we implemented a Black and Latino studies class where we got to learn more about, you know, our Black history, Latino history, stuff like that. But that's just a few schools. There's a lot of other schools that for them, they still don't have classes like that they can really relate to. And for this question, I've always performed my best in like athletic or academic settings where I'm underrepresented. And most people disagree with their statement. They feel like when they're underrepresented and they don't have someone to support them, they're not able to put forth their best self and put their best foot forward in academics or in a sport they're playing, different things like that. And this one really surprised me is like, my school listens to me and my school listens to me when you like speak about minority representation or like issues with minority representation. And a lot of people disagree with the statement that they don't feel that their school is really listening to what they have to say in terms of minority representation. Their school just don't have the resources that they need to put forth their best self in the classroom and on the athletic field. The next slide. So I kind of touched on this before, but so despite the public act, students still feel as though like they don't have staff in their school that they're able to go to that relate to them, like to speak to about certain problems they're going through. And we're still not being taught about topics that we can really relate to.
Okay, you have it here. Okay, sorry, the slides didn't. So I did an interview with Ms. Cox Blackwell. She's the Director of Equity at Enfield High. So we thought it would be appropriate to interview her and get her input. So a few of the questions we asked her was, what is the most important thing to think about when considering equity? And she had talked about how that it's best to realize that working towards achieving educational equity benefits every student, and to really take into consideration that like we have to like take into account every child at the school and like really like focus on that. And she talked about one of the most effective ways to have equity in the schools is making sure that we're really in touch with the families and students at the school and really getting their input and making sure we implement the things that they really need to succeed in schools.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about what our first possible solution is that we came up with. And the first one is already actually being implemented across Connecticut, and we just want to enforce it. and talk about how specifically we should encourage it more. And so what we want to do is encourage teaching programs and opportunities and make it available in all districts throughout Connecticut colleges and universities. So this will provide the necessary emphasis on jobs and education to students and encourage students to come back into teaching roles in their own districts. The Connecticut State Board of Education already approved a variety of educator programs that are offered at many state colleges, including alternate routes to certification. Some of these programs can be found at CCSU, Connecticut College, ECSU, UConn, Quinnipiac, and many more. There are also many nationwide programs available that we should start encouraging, like the Turnaround School Leaders Program, which helps potential principals, potential assistant principals, and potential administrators build up the skills and knowledge in education and in leadership. The Teach for America is another well-known program which works to allow every child to receive an excellent and equitable education by finding leaders that commit to expanding opportunities for low-income students specifically by placing them in a public school for a minimum of 2 years.
So our next solution was to help students create affinity spaces at school to become more comfortable in spaces where there are little representation. Oftentimes students with like little representation at school aren't really comfortable. They don't really feel safe at their school. So creating affinity spaces where they can have a space where they can feel more comfortable and be with people that just like understand where they're coming from as a student in that school. It can also increase the education of specific minority experiences in the school and help advocate for the importance and direness of having minority representation. I know personally at my school, we added a BSU, and oftentimes, like not us, but our principal and even the superintendent has come in to kind of hear more about our experiences with the club, but then also our experiences in general. So just having that as a solution as well, it's just allow students to feel more comfortable is another solution. And then our third solution, it didn't, unfortunately couldn't make it on the slide, but our third solution was just to address teachers' concerns as well. We talked a bit about this at our last meeting before the presentation, but by addressing teachers' concerns, we can actually have more minority teachers in the future, because I feel like now, oftentimes in my personal experience, I've had teachers be like, I've talked to them like, hey, maybe become a teacher sometime. They're like, no, I wouldn't really recommend it. Not because like they hate their job, but they have like a lot of concerns that they feel aren't being addressed. Or like they say that, oh, I feel like I'm being overworked. Like I have a lot of things to do that don't really involve actually teaching students like I originally anticipated. So I just feel like addressing teachers' concerns so students are like, so teachers can like actually recommend this profession to students. And now we have more students who actually want to go and become a teacher is another solution for this issue of minority representation. And yeah, that's it. Any questions?
So I understand the part where you say like addressing teachers' like concerns will get them to recommend this profession more. But it's like, how do we build those relationships between students and teachers when we're in a space where everything's so like, oh, you go into class, you learn, like, how do we get that relationship building component and like having students be able to use the teachers who are like them or who look like them as a resource instead of just having to come into school and go to class and have that teacher-student relationship?
So for my schools, my district specifically, I don't know if this applies to any other districts, but we have a thing called advisory. So like we have our own like cohort of students. Like it only happens 2 days out of our 6-day cycle, but we have like 30 minutes in between our first and our second period. We're just with like these specific students, and these are our students that like we're gonna be with from the time we start freshman year until the time we graduate. And one of the things our school actually implemented, which I thought was really cool, was they had us do this quiz our freshman year, just like a career quiz, like just to see like what you might want to go into. And then they separated us like by those quiz results to kind of like have that have a teacher who like knows more about this. So like if it was a business, a lot of students who want to go into business, like they would have a business teacher. Like having those, I feel like utilizing advisory specifically is a really good way to actually get
form those bonds and kind of like hear, because I know personally, like when I talked to one of my teachers about the potential of becoming a teacher, it was specifically in advisory when I asked them. But then oftentimes, even then, I feel like if you're able to like actually have a bond with your teacher, like with the whole SEL that you just presented, like when you create bonds with your teachers, you can actually like ask them questions about like, how is it being a teacher? Like you can get those responses out of them more comfortably than like if you're like you and your teacher are strangers.
Thank you.
So this is kind of what you were just talking about with the advisory, and it might be more of a comment than a question, but it seems like with your advisory, it's more like not necessarily one-on-one, but like you definitely have a connection with your teacher, which is really interesting because for my school, it's more just like a bunch of people in a room, and then the teacher plays like this PowerPoint or this video, but they don't know what's going on, just sit here and watch this video. And I have a class with one teacher particularly who is, I don't want to say like laid back, but he's real. Like he'll find a way to turn whatever we want to talk about into like a lesson. And I just feel like if our advisory was more like that, like instead of kind of forcing this idea or like curriculum or whatever they're trying to teach us about, if it's just like a conversation about what's happening now, we could connect. And then that's kind of like that's a perfect way to embrace those bonds between teachers and students. So just, yeah, I just wanted to say that like that.
Yeah.
It seems like the way your school does it is definitely more efficient.
Yeah, kind of feedback off a little bit. Like that's like when it's over PowerPoint lecture, it's like a script. Like it's like everything is set. Like you can't. If somebody asks a question, I feel like the teacher they could be a little thrown off. Like if it's a conversation and discussion back and forth, then that relationship is strengthened instead of it just being like it's 7 in the morning and we're looking at PowerPoint watching video and teachers not even really engaged. They could be doing something else or like not everybody in the classroom is like fully locked in on the topic. Rather, if it's a discussion, you go back and forth and everybody can share their own insight.
And then like the thing with advisory as well is like there is a limitation there too, just because specifically I talked to my one of my assistant principals about this, like with advisory, they can't actually enforce it with the teachers because you do have some teachers that are like much more prone to actually like talk to us as students, like kind of see and converse with us, but you do have some advisory who are just like, it's a study hall, like do your homework for 30 minutes and then go to your next class. So I feel like there has to be something there as well, just to ensure that like, you're not going there and just having a study hall, like you could actually become comfortable with these other students, but then also that teacher as well, and kind of like know more about what you're there for.
If you were in charge, do you have any suggestions that like you would want them to do to kind of like change the way that it is, or?
Like for advisory?
Yeah.
I personally like, I've seen it like with my school specifically, like the presentations just don't work. Because the thing, especially when you don't have a grade, I feel like grades are like one way to kind of like get students on, because when you're in class, like, you know, I'm doing this work for a grade. But like when you're listening to a presentation, you do have some students that are like, it's kind of disrespectful, just like be on your phone while somebody's presenting. But like you have no grade attached, like there's nothing attached to it. So just like sitting there and having a presentation read to you isn't as effective in that setting, just because students might not care because like you're not getting a grade for advisory. Like for advisory, it's just like, this is your time, like this is your time with your advisory. So I feel like moving away from presentations and lectures and more into like more engaging material for students where they can actually like come together. Like we did a Kahoot competition at my school once in advisory for Black History Month, like more things like that, that truly engage our students rather than just like shouting at them for 30 minutes of presentation would be more effective for that.
Any other questions?
Was that who was that Brenton that was speaking?
No, that's Jamard.
Jamar? Oh, okay, Jamar, you're big time. But I just want to say this, and this is something that I mentioned when I was, when I zoomed in on the rehearsals. This is just one of the things we got to be careful with. Like the presentation was great. But with a topic of this type of magnitude, the same with the SEL topic, with how important it is, this is just my perspective when we spend a year on putting together a project to deliver it. Like, we got to make sure we deliver it with that same intensity that matches the nature of the cause, right? We talk about racial disparities and how important it is. And we got to just be careful of coming to a platform like this and having a conversation about it, because these conversations happen all the time and nothing gets done about it. Like, we got to make sure like we deliver it with a purpose. Like, I want something to come out of this conversation versus I'm just here presenting this, let's just have a conversation about racial disparities. And I'm not saying that was the way you approached it, but that's kind of that's the feeling I got with listening to this one. As I said, it was a great presentation. With just listening to any other conversation about it, I want to make sure when, and I just want everyone to make sure that when people leave these conversations, they're already thinking of solutions. Like, they're thinking of what to do next and not just thinking, oh, okay, that was a cool presentation. So I just want to make sure that we understand that there's a purpose behind sitting together, joining these groups, spending as much time as you guys have over the past 9 months, really coming up with these presentations. Like, make sure that we are delivering it with that vigor that so it elicits a response and elicits change, and not just people just saying like, oh, this is just another conversation about racial disparities. Because if that's the case, nothing will change next year. We're going to have this same conversation from our Student Equity Advisory Board, and then nothing will change in 24, 25. It's just going to be another conversation. Like, remember, we're doing this to actually get people moving and create change.
Good morning. I did want to make a comment, not necessarily so much a question. So I'm Altressa Cox Blackwell. I'm the Director of Educational Equity that was included, or who was included in the presentation. And what I want to point out regarding minority representation is we actually have a very small pool. And so the districts are pulling for the same few people, which is just a whole nother level of concern. In addition to that, I did hear in the presentation, it was mentioned about the Grow Your Own programs, and Enfield is involved in them as well. But it's not just mentioning those programs. There are budgetary constraints associated with each of them. So, we can approach people and say, would you like to participate? But there has to be that willingness and dedication, because one program may require that they quit the current job that they have because they have to be full-time for an intensive 2-year program. Or another one might require an outlay of money from the district, if not necessarily from the prospective candidates. I just want to emphasize that I can only speak for Enfield, and we're focusing on increasing educator diversity regarding certified teachers, because we tend to have more people of color or BIPOC representation in our behavior technicians and our paras and a few security officers. So students do see BIPOC representation within the district, within the schools, but it's our certified staff that we want to work on increasing. And the last comment I want to make is that right now, we know we have a lot of unfilled teacher positions. People are leaving the teaching profession. And so we have to look at what we can do if we get them, if they're hired, to retain them so that they'll want to stay. And so then all the rest of that was in the presentation regarding the graphs can be addressed. I will say I'm personally concerned that students say they don't have an adult in the building that they can go to. And I'm hoping that whether that's through minority representation or not, that we can improve that percentage.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, our final group.
Good morning. I'm Isaiah. This is Yasmin, Liana, Key, and Brenton. Today we're going to talk to you about racial disparities. So why are we here today? We are in hopes to take a problem solution approach to identifying the issues that come with racial disparities and come up with ways to address them and mediate these issues. So we have three really major key focus points. The first one being how can we make our curriculum more understanding of different races, so it's not just one specific race getting all of the intellect. The next one would be how do racial issues play out on the field, on the court, basically just in sports in general. And the third one being accommodating cultural holidays. How can schools be more inclusive of students from different cultural, racial, and religious backgrounds? We also minor in there's also another add-on slide for implicit bias that also will take place in racial disparities.
So as Isaiah mentions, the first piece that we wanted to cover was making our curriculums inclusive in hopes of minimizing racial disparities. So what you see right here is a survey from the National School Boards Association, and what it found was that 68% of students wanted more opportunities to learn about culture. So when we were doing our research, one thing we were really curious about was, is it that students themselves aren't interested and there just isn't enough demand for it? But what this survey showed us is that students are interested in getting that cultural information. So to start by defining our problem, since we are taking that problem solution approach, a lot of students have to teach their peers about the basics of their culture. And this results in students stereotyping their peers. When a student doesn't have any further knowledge about someone's culture, they tend to just fall for those stereotypes. But with better curricula, we can minimize those racial disparities. The Connecticut State Board of Education has a cultural responsiveness statement, and it says that they support and affirm the importance of a culturally responsive education for all students. And while it's great to say that such a thing is supported, that doesn't implement what we need in our curricula and make our curriculum more inclusive. So the solution to this problem would be implementing cultural information into our already existing curricula. We have new courses like the Black and Latino Studies course, and those are amazing. I was so happy when I saw that those were implemented. But it's very common for those courses not to run. At my school, the course doesn't run because not enough students are interested in signing up for it at my school. But of course, that varies from school to school. And a problem with a course where, all the cultural information is offered to students, but they have to take the initiative to go and take that course, is that a student who's causing racial disparities is not likely to go out of their way to take a course about culture. And because culture is hardly presented to students, the idea of taking a full year course about culture could be a pretty overwhelming concept, especially when students already have other course requirements that they want to fulfill. So the solution would really be to continue to offer this course, but really make sure that we're implementing culture in our already existing curricula. So in our history courses, for example, say you're doing a segment on the Middle East, then there should be a cultural segment showing the geography of the Middle East and learning about the culture, because oftentimes it's that those countries are only taught about the way they were colonized, rather than showing that there's culture to those countries. So really just going beyond learning that those countries were colonized is very important. So that is how we would improve racial disparities through curriculum.
So our second conversation that we'll be having is sports, and
I'll move this down to there. Preventing racial disparities outside of schools. So our first example is going to be talking about a current HBCU, which is Delaware State University, and a recent incident that occurred during 2020. If you don't know, Delaware State their lacrosse team recently experienced a like racial inconvenience, but their lacrosse team was stopped for a traffic violation in which Georgia's police officers intimidated athletes in order to confess to marijuana possession. At the time, they were searched by police officers and they were asked whether they had marijuana, and beforehand, they had been told that it was just a traffic stop violation and that nothing was going to occur. And it left a lot of the students traumatized and caused them to resort to like recording the evidence, and they posted it online, in which it gained national coverage and it reached a lot of news outlets. And it highlighted the issues that a lot of minority students face when playing sports in segregated, or not segregated, but more like in more predominantly white towns that are not here to support these athletes. So nationally, they are trying to prevent this from happening or occurring again. So what they put a lot of emphasis on the solutions that they are trying to put down nationally. They put a lot of emphasis on what they are trying to do in the current like national level. And right now there are consequences already set to put places. If they experience any negative behavior that has to do with racial profiling, they will be changing that, have people who can identify important information such as badge numbers, supervisor numbers, license plate, etc. Have racial and diversity trainings for students or athletes so they are properly equipped if they have to endure racism.
So our second example comes from a high school that's actually goes to my high school that's in Connecticut. A 16-year-old Black cheerleader was met with slurs when she was attending a football game at a Connecticut high school. Her team reported to multiple school officials. These cheerleaders were thoroughly apologized to. However, like they basically said that no slurs were like nothing was really stated. An investigation was sent to the CAS-CIAC, sent to both schools to training sessions. So kind of piggyback off of what Liana said, these kind of like sessions are like, I feel like they're a necessity that is needed in schools all throughout the state of Connecticut. It doesn't matter what conference you're in, CIAC, NCCC, it doesn't matter. Every school, I feel, should be required to take at least one sort of training session so they can be equipped if they go through this experience again. So we also had like several other similar cases happen in the state of Connecticut, where certain situations are dealt with differently and even dismissed due to race or ethnicity. After research, we proposed other ways to deal with the situation and to like prevent further accusations. The first one is stricter rules, like bans and suspensions to be put into place. So I feel like when it comes to a topic like this, nobody would really lie about being called a racial slur. So I understand kind of like needing to hear both sides, but if the team reported it, then it's obvious that that person was uncomfortable. So a ban or suspension should be like definitely put in place. Racial and diversity training for coaches as well. So the students is one thing, they're on the court, but if coaches, you know, somebody comes to you and like one of your players or athletes comes to you and you don't know what to do, then everybody's gonna look at you as the bad guy or no bad woman, because you're not properly equipped for the situation. So that's why having racial and diversity training sessions, so that way when if you are faced with this type of like situation, you're properly equipped and you know how to move and exactly what to do. Also providing mental health resources and providing disciplinary guides for coaches to help handle these situations better. Kind of to like really talk about providing mental health resources. That was a traumatic experience for Delaware State incident and also the 16-year-old cheerleader. So having resources available for her, and not just her, but for every kind of like athlete that goes into that situation, that's a necessity because yes, it might have happened one time, it could have been one little slur, it doesn't matter, it still happened. So having like resources that are like available, that is like definitely needed and should be put in place.
Before you move on, I just want to say that in the last year and a half, it's happened at least 4 times and within within Connecticut. And the suspensions that we are trying to put or force or kind of like ask for to be put in place is kind of athletic suspensions. Because at times students aren't going to care if you suspend them from school. They're gonna take it as a free day. And so instead of suspending them and being like, oh, you get to have your day off, we need students, if they are athletes, to not be able to go to games. The next couple of games, whether it's a state game, whether it's whatever, they're not gonna be allowed to go to games in the future. We also want to make sure that these students, although they are met with racial or like training, that it's actually enforced and that there is somebody within the CIAC that is overseeing it, because the CIAC does stand for equity and kind of inclusion. So we want to make sure that everything is being kind of equitable to these students who are feeling targeted and that everybody's voice is heard.
Yeah, I just want to add a little bit to that. There's a lot of rules and like standards set in place, especially when it comes to coaches and like the gold star. I know that was a thing in my school, the gold standard or whatever it's called, but that really doesn't stop a lot of things. Like it's absurd to me that if you miss a practice before a meet or a game, you can't play in the game. But I had an incident at my school where somebody was saying racial slurs when somebody would do something on defense and like mess them up during a practice. And it was brought up to the coach many times. And because they were a star player, they gave an apology that you could tell was not sincere. And then they were on the starting lineup the next game. And so that accountability not only needs to come from the coaches and like the players, but it also needs to be enforced by the CIAC. And if something like this keeps occurring, like it should be acceptable for a student and an athlete to contact the CIAC and for direct punishments to be enforced instead of just being like, okay, we're gonna send them to a training session, because clearly racism can't really be solved by training.
I think also to piggyback off that, like really talk about like the star athletes. So I'm a 3-sport athlete. My main sport is basketball. I am not a soccer player. I did it in the fall for conditioning to get ready for basketball, but I was luckily named one of the captains of the team. So I feel like, but I'm not the best, one of the best players on the team. Soccer is just not for me. If you play soccer, congratulations. Like y'all got it. But I was the captain of the team because of the leadership role I had. So holding those star players accountable when they're not playing to their full potential. So kind of to piggyback off, we said if one of our star players is getting on other teammates or even the opposing players as the captain, so I understand definitely coaches and star players hold themselves accountable. But as a captain, like somebody might look at you, you're not one of the best players. I understand that, but I earned this role. I'm a captain of this team for a reason. So my job is to hold you accountable if you're calling other people racial slurs and making fun of people, putting people down. At the end of the day, it's a game. Soccer, basketball, tennis, whatever it is, it's just a game. But at the end of the day, we treat this game with respect. And if you can't hold yourself accountable as a captain, regardless of like how good they are, you need to hold them accountable, because that's how we address it. And you're right, training sessions aren't going to stop racism. So holding each other accountable, that could definitely, I'm not saying bring it all the way down to where like racism isn't a problem. No, it's going to be a problem. But holding each other accountable and being afraid to, like, not being afraid to put yourself out there because somebody might be faster than you or get kick a ball further than you, that doesn't matter. At the end of the day, we preach sportsmanship. I know at classical we preach that, but I know every school, like, nobody goes out of the way that I'm gonna get somebody feel down. No, it's a game, it's a sport. So holding each other accountable, definitely from captain, star player, coaches, parents, even anything helps.
I think talking about implicit bias.
I'm sorry. I don't know what happened with the slides.
I'll be talking about implicit bias in schools and our communities. So there is a disproportionate amount of teachers to students of color, which was mentioned in previous presentations. The National Department of Education statistics said that 79% of teachers were white, and at predominantly white schools, 90% of those teachers were white. And at schools where students of color were the majority, around 2/3 of the teaching population was still white. So as we've heard that teachers are white and are majorly white in all the circumstances, and that makes it harder for students of color to actively connect with their teachers on a closer level if they were someone that looked like them. So it is a fact that people of color, students of color may deal with microaggressions and the use of stereotypes because other students are unable to look at others past the scope of what they learn in school, and it's harder for them to realize like the biases that are taught to them during their curriculums. Like as has been mentioned in history classes, we learn about other nations through imperialism, colonialism, and not through their actual culture and the nations themselves. So that makes it harder for students to look past these biases, and they might project these biases onto students of color in real time. And when that happens, it is harder for teachers to give out punishments because they don't realize the direness of the situation. So, and as an example, when referencing the struggle of a particular racial group, they may ask a person within that group if they've experienced that. I've had that happen to me from a teacher at my school personally. So when that happens, one does feel excluded and uncomfortable because you're looking around, because I go to a predominantly white school, so I'm looking around and no one else looks like me. So it's harder for me to feel connected to other students as well as the teacher in these situations.
I think real quick, if I just piggyback off that last piece, there was a little piece in the bottom that said people of color in like AP classes, they are surrounded by their peers. I don't mean to say this in the last presentation, I think before that, but I saw 9% of like minorities are in AP classes. So with them looking around, and especially with being singled out, looking around, 9% of the class, we usually have maybe even 20 students in the class, you could be the only person in that class. And looking around when your teacher singles you out and realizing it's just you, that could put you down, and you know, especially the cumulative effect. So if that happens over time, your performance in the class might decrease because I'm being singled out. Like I feel like you can put up in your head, this is not fair. So I think with like increasing that like percentage in the AP classes, that could definitely help us out. Yeah.
Also, like, so as an addition, when other students do like make comments, it is harder, like the teacher does not address them as well as they would if they had that knowledge to realize that like things that said may have been microaggressions, or to fully empathize with the student that has been targeted and understand why they feel the way they do. Okay, so as of now, there are implicit bias training courses, but they are voluntary or online courses. outside of the required training that teachers go through already. So our goal is to make this mandatory and to promote awareness of issues and enable teachers to be more conscious of themselves as well as the things that they are teaching students. Mandatory implicit bias training should be mandatory during the period which teachers are trained to become certified, as well as after that during days like professional development days. These topics should be reinforced so that teachers are able to come back to it and apply it to the current curriculum they are teaching now. Also, mental health resources should be included for students that do go through these experiences. For example, there should be mandatory counseling after like classroom incidents or incidents on the court or field for athletes, just to allow them to recuperate or have someone to talk to. Also, discipline towards students that are the aggressors in this situation should be enforced as well as stricter, as was mentioned previously. So athletes should go through athletic suspension, and suspension should be incorporated for students. At my school, we do have a session which they watch, like a video they watch during their suspension, during in-school suspension, and a small course that they do take to realize like the effects of their actions.
Okay. And then lastly here, before we go into more solutions in a summary, it's just recognizing different races, especially when it comes to cultural holidays. So it's pretty common knowledge that there are many Christian or Catholic holidays such as Christmas or Good Friday that are recognized nationally and by the school district. And so we get school days off, and, you know, we get to celebrate those holidays. However, there's many other cultures that are represented, even if not at a higher level, that don't have this luxury of celebrating over an extended break. And they're kind of forced to just have to be in class when they should be celebrating, just like other people get to during Christmas or Good Friday.
I think if I could say something real quick, sorry I keep this interactive, but like, so I understand that we talk about Good Friday and Christmas and stuff like that, and sometimes even Juneteenth, but like, what about Kwanzaa, what about Hanukkah? Like, at least we could do is have a conversation or assembly about it, so at least discuss what it is. Some people might not even know what it is, and I know it's not like giving us school days off. If that's the case, we'd have like 2 days out of the week for school during that whole time period, and you know, we got to learn, get an education. The least we could do is maybe on a Friday we could have a conversation about it. We could have a discussion, assembly, orientation, at least talking about what it is and bring somewhat awareness to it. Not, you know, like giving them off and stuff like that, but at least talking about it so everybody knows what it is instead of just glossing over it in the school calendar.
So, like exactly what he just said, we can't have all holidays off, obviously, because we would rarely have school. But it is still very possible to have this inclusion and to make people feel included and not like an outsider or they're not important. So, for example, one of the possible solutions would be allowing students to receive extensions on homework or classwork so they can miss school or not have to worry about doing homework during a holiday. Because when you're celebrating with your family or whoever, you really don't want to be worrying about an assignment that's hanging over your head. And it's important here that not only should these extensions be allowed, but they should be mandated, and teachers should be aware and be educated on these holidays coming up so they could go out of their way and say, hey, I know this holiday is coming up. If you celebrate, feel free to just get this in when you can, you know, because it really shouldn't be on the student to go out of their way and be like, hey, I have this holiday and I'm not gonna be able to get this homework assignment done, because a lot of students might be discouraged by that idea that they have to go up and, you know, it almost seems like making an excuse because other students don't have to do this, and so why should it be any different for them? But yeah, it shouldn't be their concern, and they should be, teachers should be aware about these and reach out first. And then also, besides teachers being aware, students should be aware and more educated on different cultures, and this loops back to what we first talked about, which was inclusive curricula. Many times, I know for me personally, I celebrate both Christmas and Hanukkah. So my grandma is Jewish, so I celebrate Passover, Hanukkah, and a lot of the time when people find that out, they're like, oh, that's so cool. You get like a week full of gifts and stuff like that. And I feel like that's just not fair because I only get gifts like in the first few minutes, but no, but seriously, they know very little about it and they're like, oh, so you play dreidel. And what people know about these holidays is almost feeding into that stereotype. Sorry, I blanked on the word for a second. So for example, when I tell people about Hanukkah, they're like, oh, you play dreidel, and then they sing the song, and it's almost like demoralizing that that's all they know. They don't know what it's about. They don't know what the reason is or what it means to celebrate that. And I know that applies to a lot of other holidays like Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, Ramadan, Eid, Chinese New Year, Pesach. Like, I'm thinking about this now, and obviously I'm not immune to this. I'm not perfect either. Like for Chinese New Year, I know very little, to the point where even when teachers were trying to teach it in elementary school, it could become offensive and stereotypical because all I know is that there's like animals for different years, and that's not okay. Going into the real world and being an adult, there should be education, whether it's in the curriculum or like an assembly, like we're saying, where we just say, hey, this is what this is actually about, and know that it's kind of rude to just put on your expectations or your thoughts on other people's cultures and holidays.
And just to add on, we talk about how high school is kind of like preparation for like college and etc. But how can we prepare ourselves if we don't have empathy towards other people and be compassionate and understand what other people are going through?
And I'd also like to highlight the point about teachers reaching out, because it's really different if a student has to go out of their way to take the initiative versus a teacher being the one to take the initiative. And as a student who's celebrated Eid for my whole life, most of the time I just go to school because I think it's so much easier, and then I celebrate when I get home. Because what I see is 8 emails I have to send asking for an extension on the work, what did I miss and all that. Never have I ever had a teacher like reach out to me and say, oh, like happy holidays, here's what you're gonna miss. So I've come to the point where I just go to school instead. So I think that really highlights the importance of making sure teachers are aware of these holidays and that they take that initiative.
Yeah, that's really the difference here, because we're not looking for understandable teachers to be understanding, because it's pretty easy to say like, hey, we celebrate this. Well, it is inconvenient, like it's possible, and that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for teachers to be educated and go out of their way and understand this, and that's where we are seeking the change. So lastly, we're just going to summarize all the recommendations. So
yeah, so obviously we had a lot that we just put out in front of everyone. So to really recap everything that we have, starting with the recommendations for curricula, that would be to make sure our curricula cover more than just here's the US, here's Europe, and here's the countries that Europe colonized. It should really go beyond that. And then we also talked about implicit bias training and making sure that that's mandatory in the process of becoming a teacher, knowing what knowledge you should have if you're becoming a teacher, but then also while you're a teacher. And then we also talked about on the court or fields and having accountability for all players regardless of their level. And then finally we moved into the holidays and talking about not expecting that all holidays are taken off. That's also, that a lot of people think that that's what students want, and of course, that's not realistic, but rather just making sure that students are accommodated and can still celebrate even if the day can't be taken off. So, any questions?
You guys were talking about how like you want teachers to take the initiative, reach out first and stuff like that, right? But how do you make sure they go about that and not be offensive? Because when we sent out our survey, someone actually like touched on that and they said that the teacher reached out to them, like gave them excuse absence for the day for a holiday that they don't even celebrate. They said school they celebrated just because their last name.
I think it starts with the conversation. Just instead of automatically jumping into, oh, I'm just automatically giving the day off, oh, I'm gonna just next day assignment. No, just have a conversation with them. Understand what the holiday is, because like I said, COVID hit all of us hard. We have rising eighth graders, or rather freshmen, who can't even really have a conversation with adults. So with adults who, you know, they have those years of experience, cognitive functioning hit earlier, you know, they could be like, okay, so what is Hanukkah? And can you tell me about what Hanukkah is? That way you're not being like, okay, I'm gonna just automatically give you the week off. No, just have a conversation with them. And that way, that not only kind of like helps them understand what it is, but then also like kind of like brings back the conversation piece of a student to a teacher like relationship. Because that way everybody can have a conversation and both people are informed like, oh, you care about what my holiday is. Not a lot of people do that. So that makes the student feel better and that strengthens the relationship even more, because not only are you going out of your way, you're educating yourself. So then when others, say I have a younger sibling, say I have other friends who also celebrate the same holiday, then you're not just like kind of like strengthening our relationship, but you're making yourself a better after teacher.
And just an idea of like how a teacher could approach that is like in the beginning of class or the beginning of the semester, when you walk into a class, usually you guys are doing like icebreakers. I know at least at my school, you guys are doing icebreakers and kind of getting to know your students, and the students are trying to get to know you. During that time, you could ask and be like, does anybody have any holidays that they celebrate throughout the year that they would like to share? And that would give the sense that you care, and you're, again, including that empathy piece, and you're being compassionate, but it's also allowing the student to feel safe and be able to be like, oh, this is the holiday I share. And then after that, taking a note of that, because I know what my teachers, she writes down like everybody's birthday. That's the same way you could be like writing down like the holiday that you know that one of your students share and taking note of that. And then afterwards you could be like sending them that email, being like, I know you celebrate this, don't feel so stressed about getting this assignment done.
And then I also think a really simple solution to that would be just at the start of the year, if the school sent out a survey asking students what their cultural obligations are throughout the year, and a student just listed them out, the school could then right from that just build a database of what everyone's requirements are, and that would allow, you know, more than just holidays. If students have to fast for some reason, the teachers are aware of that. If students have prayers they have to attend to or something like that, there's a database to make note of all of that, and then no assumptions have to be made based on, you know, a last name.
Just like how we have a list of allergies. You can have a list.
That's true.
Any other question?
Great. All right. Well, we're just about, have about 5 minutes left. So if any of our students or any of the adults in the room would like any last minute questions, comments, anything you would like, remember this is being recorded. So it's going to be sent out to many people. So if there's any last minute thoughts, now is the time.
I have a question for the students. I'm just wondering, and this is open to any of you. What do you think are what have you identified, excuse me, as the main themes that string all of your work together? Because you all had different topics that obviously are very relatable to one another. Did any themes emerge for you?
I would say teacher-student relations, because that's pretty much the core of everything. And it doesn't even have to be teachers, just any adult, because often it's very rare for people to come together like this and have a conversation with adults and students where we just talk. And even when we do, it can often feel like we're mad at the adults because, we think, oh, well, you should be doing that. And it's really hard to have just a conversation where we say how we're feeling and it's actually listened to. So I think if more administrators, teachers, whatever, just talk to us like we're humans instead of students or kids, that could be so much better. And like, that's what we're even saying about advisory, look like we're fed like a script. Like you guys are given a script, oh, you have to teach them this. And then it's completely lost in translation. Just talk to us and listen to what we have to say. And then instead of taking something and putting it down and giving it to us, take what we're saying and what's happening in the real world and turn that into a lesson. So just really communication.
And those relationships, what were you gonna say?
I was gonna say this relationship. I also feel like it's partly the awareness of not only of the issue, but also the advancement and effort you're putting into changing the issue.
I think there's too much emphasis on like trying to accept it. And I feel like teachers also feel like it's kind of being forced down their throats. What I feel like we need to do is like celebrate it instead and not make it so forced, like to make students feel comfortable, as in like actually like being there for the students. So I did 2 years of high school in India and I went to an international school. And so every time there was like a major like religious or cultural thing, we would have like a school-wide like assembly. Like for Pride Month, we would have an assembly, we would talk about it, we would celebrate it. For Christian holidays, you would do something. For Hindu holidays, you would do something. For Muslim holidays, you would do something. And just kind of forced us to celebrate it and accept it. Well, not forced us, but it helped us accept it and celebrate it and see it as more of like something that other people do, as something that's happening all around us with our friends. And I don't know where I'm trying to go with this, but it's like something that we should not be forced to accept, but something to understand that it's happening.
Opportunities for context.
Perspective. That's kind of our process. Yeah.
You did it, you said it. Any other things?
I also feel like school intervention as well is just as important as teacher intervention, because like I heard touch upon this, like oftentimes like teachers and another recommendation touch upon this, like oftentimes teachers feel like burnout, like they feel like they're being overworked. So as much as it is on the teacher, I feel like the school actually has to take it upon themselves as well to kind of implement some of these things inside of their school. So it's not on the teacher just be like, oh, I have to do all this extra work. Like one specific thing that I've seen regarding like, this is an example as with the holidays, like just having inside of your school calendar, like with all the half days, days off, just have the holidays in your school calendar. Now when you're looking at the holidays, you can see like what it is, then you can start to like maybe lessen the workload during these times if you know that your students are going to be participating. I feel like as much as it's on the teacher, some things could just be like within the school. So the teacher doesn't have to do like so much more extra work to actually create a safe space for their students.
All right, any other questions, comments, anything?
All right, well, what an amazing morning. I always leave these final presentations with a million things going through my head of how I'm going to walk out this door and try to change the world. But thank you all for your tremendous work. I also wanted to know we have here with us today, Dr. Alicia Bowman and Tiffany Cowett. And they're here because most of the work they do here is with school leaders and administrators. And they're here to listen to you to figure out what the issues are so they can bring it back to those school leaders and administrators and really try to make a difference and try to make change in Connecticut. So again, thank you for the tremendous work that you've done throughout this school year. Seniors, I can't tell you how much I'm going to miss you all. But continue this work. Don't stop here. Don't go off to college or in whatever you decide to do in the workforce and, cut it off there. Continue to have a voice, continue to advocate for yourself and what you believe in. And don't forget to come back to Connecticut and give back to the students here, who follow you. So thank you all. And best of luck in the future. Congratulations to the Student Equity Advisory Board and enjoy the rest of your day.